Hello there, we're going to finish with the topic of assimilation today. Let's look at these examples. Read them, paying special attention to the highlighted sounds. Do you say right you are? Would you? In case you? Has you? That is a possibility, but in general what people say is right you are, sir. Would you? Would you like to order? In case you need it. Has your order arrived? You might have probably noticed these cases are different from the ones we saw in the first video, in the sense that in the previous cases there was one sound affecting another one, whereas in this case there is a combination of two sounds that results in a different one. So what I want you to do now is to analyze the examples and complete the missing information. And once you're ready, you keep on watching. So, as you can see, we are again talking about alveolar sounds, in this case combined with the yod, which is this sound. So this would be the last sound in the first word, and this would be the first sound in the second word. And combined, they result in a different sound. This kind of assimilation is called coalescent assimilation. To coalesce is to form a group. Right? Or yod coalescence, because of the second sound, which is the yod. Let's see what happens in these cases, which introduce a different kind of assimilation. You know that in some words you've got the possibility to elide the schwa. That is, to omit it, not to produce it. So you can say happen or happen. Urban, urban. Bacon, bacon. Organ, organ. If you elide the schwa, another possibility arises, and that would be the one exemplified here, because of the influence of the first sound. So you can also say happen, bacon, organ. Interesting, don't you think? Okay, let's see if you can complete the information here, and then we will analyze this together. All these cases include the alveolar nasal in final position in words in which the schwa has been elided. When the sound that precedes the alveolar nasal is bilabial, the alveolar nasal changes into a bilabial nasal because of the influence of the sound that precedes it. So now the influence goes in the other direction, because the cases we saw before in the first video included examples where the second sound affected the first one, whereas in this case is the first sound that affects the one that follows. So, as you have seen, the alveolar nasal assimilates into the bilabial nasal when it is preceded by bilabial sounds, p or b, and it assimilates into the velar nasal when it is preceded by velar sounds. This summarizes what we have just said. The context is a plosive followed by a syllabic nasal, that is, a nasal in a syllable where the schwa has been omitted. If we compare the plosive with the nasal that takes the place of the alveolar nasal, we can see that they are homorganic. That is, the change is a change of place. That's why here it says the nasal undergoes assimilation to the same place of articulation as the preceding plosive. Let's analyze the complete name of this kind of assimilation. It is phonemic because there is a change of phoneme. N is replaced by m or n. But if you think about the direction, that is, which sound affects the other, it is the first one that influences the one that follows. So it's not regressive assimilation, it's a case of progressive assimilation. And if you compare the original sound with the one that takes its place, n is voiced, m is voiced, and n is voiced. So we are not talking about a change of voice, but n is alveolar and m, the sound that takes its place, is bilabial, and in this case the alveolar nasal assimilates into the velar nasal, so the change is a change of place. So the complete name of this case of assimilation is phonemic progressive assimilation of place. We still have other cases to analyze together. Let's see what happens here, where v assimilates into f because of the influence of this sound. Can you complete any of the missing words? Think about it, and once you're ready, keep on watching. So what happens here? There is a change of phoneme. V assimilates into f. That's why it's called phonemic. Why does it change? Because of the influence of the following sound. So the second sound affects the first one. This is a case of regressive assimilation. But what changes? Let's compare the original sound with the one that takes its place. V is labiodental and f is labiodental as well. So it's not a change of place of articulation, but v is voiced and f is voiceless. So this is a case of assimilation of voice. Why does it change? Because of the influence of the second sound that is voiceless as well. Voiceless, voiceless. Let's see what happens here. We have seen that voiced sounds, fricative sounds for example, lose some voice when they are followed by a voiceless sound. How do we call this process? Do you remember? We call this process devoicing, and we use this diacritic under the sound that is devoiced to mark it. But in this case, if we analyze the change, we're not changing the phoneme. Now, this is an allophonic variant of the same phoneme. So we are not talking about phonemic assimilation in this case. We are talking about allophonic assimilation. Let's see if you can think about the complete name of this kind of assimilation. That is, if you can tell me whether it is regressive or progressive, and if it is a case of assimilation of voice or of place. Stop the video, think about it, and continue watching once you've got the answer. Let's stop here for a second to clarify something in case it is necessary. When we talked about allophonic variants, that is, changes of sounds in context, we defined cases like this one as a case of devoicing, in which a voiced sound loses some voice because of the influence of a voiceless sound that follows it. Let's remember what assimilation means. If you think about it, we said that assimilation is the change of a sound because of the influence of a neighboring sound. So we can analyze some processes that we have already seen as cases of allophonic variants as cases of assimilation. So that would be a different way of analyzing the same situation. That is, devoicing is a case of assimilation. Let's see what kind. The original sound is not replaced by a different sound. It's not a case of phonemic assimilation. It is a case of allophonic assimilation. The sound changes because of the influence of the second sound, so this is a case of regressive assimilation. The second sound affects the first one. And if we say that in this case the sound loses some voice, the sound remains being alveolar. What happens is that there is a change of voice, so the complete name of this kind of assimilation would be allophonic regressive assimilation of voice. We can also analyze the cases of the inflectional S and ED endings that we saw a long time ago as cases of assimilation. What I mean by inflectional S, I mean how you form plural nouns, possessives, and the third person singular of the simple present, and also how to pronounce the endings of regular verbs in the past and of ed adjectives. So we said that we had to take into account the last sound of the verb in the infinitive, for example, or the noun in the singular form, right? In order to decide how to pronounce the S in those cases and the ed ending in the case of regular verbs in the past. So the verb in the infinitive, live, ends in a voiced sound. So in order to form the third person singular in the simple present, you add the voiced option. These could be considered cases of assimilation. What kind of assimilation? Think about it, stop the video and continue when you have the answer. You add a phoneme, so this is a case of phonemic assimilation. You add this particular phoneme because the first sound defines the one that follows it. last sound in the verb in the infinitive is voiced, you add a voiced sound. If the last sound of the word, in this case in the singular form, is voiceless, you add the voiceless option. So this is a case of assimilation of voice, and the complete name would be phonemic progressive assimilation of voice. Let's see what happens here if you contract the verb to be. If you compare both versions, there is a change here in the verb to be. We are going to analyze this case. That can be considered a case of assimilation. The last sounding word defines the production of the following sound. Think about what kind of assimilation this could be. When you have the answer, continue watching. We are defining what phoneme follows, so it's a case of phonemic assimilation. The last sounding word defines the sound that follows, so it's a case of progressive assimilation. T is voiceless, S is voiceless. You choose this one because they share the same voice, or in this case lack of voice. It's a case of assimilation of voice. What about cases of dentalization? Cases of dentalization can also be taken as cases of assimilation. Let's see if you can infer the name. What happens with alveolar sounds l, n, d and t when they are followed by dental sounds is that they change their place of articulation because of the influence of the second sound. We are not replacing this sound with another one. It's not a case of phonemic assimilation, it's a case of allophonic assimilation, actually shown marked with that diacritic. The second sound affects the first one, so it's a case of regressive assimilation. And what changes is the place of articulation, because the lateral sound is an alveolar sound, but in this context, followed by a dental sound, it is dentalized. So it's a case of assimilation of place. So this phrase serves as an example of dentalization or an example of allophonic regressive assimilation of place. We know this is a lot of information. What if it's not that clear? Suggestions. Read Crattenden's book. Watch the video again. Try to work with a theoretical assignment with a partner. We're going to talk about all this in our next Zoom meeting. Believe me, it gets easier when you start working with the material and analyzing other cases. We will help you. We will always be there for you. And we will not stop until this is clear for you, okay? So don't panic. See you soon.